Most people are caught by what they see. Evelyn Rhodes survived by pretending she couldn't. Not an illness, not an accident, just smoked lenses and a white cane sharpened into armor. For 8 years she drifted through the Gallo mansion as if made of fog, a milk-eyed maid with a braid she never unbound, a shadow who knew every blind spot better than the cameras did. To guests, she was pity in a teal dress. To the guards, forgettable. And to the man who tried this city like a courtroom, she was no one at all. She never meant to get this close to Don Tiberius, the Sentinel Gallo. She never meant to need Lucia's kindness like air, but survival is a performance, and one wrong reflex ends the show. The night he decides to watch the Watcher, Evelyn will learn whether her darkness can hold. Before we begin, like the video, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. Where are you watching from? The Vale's rules. Rain stacked itself against the mansion's high windows, turning the gold salon into a dim aquarium of light and shadow. Music from the East Wing bled through the walls, laughter, cutlery, a trumpet hitting a note too bright cover sound for servants and sins. Evelyn moved with the measured stagger of someone who couldn't see, cane ticking softly over parquet she had memorized to the millimeter. Rule 1. Never look at a voice. Rule 2. Never walk a straight line. Rule 3, the one that lived in her bones, never catch what falls. She set a silver tray on the piano lid and pretended to feel her way along the edge, while her other hand, invisible behind the drape of her sleeve, angled the thimble-sized pinhole camera sewn into the cuff. The antique tapestry across from her rippled in the draft, its woven vines and gilded numerals opulent to the eye, ordinary to anyone who didn't know that the pattern was an equation, and the equation was a bank. Evelyn breathed through the sting of the scleral lenses. She counted heartbeats between lightning flashes 3, 4, 5, and advanced a half-step off rhythm so the new camera in the sconce would record what every camera recorded. A blind girl's stutter step through a room made for verdicts. From the party came the muffled roar of a toast. The capos would be toasting the audit, no doubt. The sentinel had pulled his men in for counting and scraping, listening for the thin squeal that meant a bearing was going. He called it oversight. Everyone else called it fear. Evelyn traced the piano as if reading its grain and caught the faintest scent thread she had trained herself to notice: lemon oil, old paper, gun oil so clean it was almost floral. He had been here earlier. Or he was coming. Footsteps entered the salon with a confidence that didn't need announcing. The glass in the window caught his outline. First the thick shoulders cased in blue-black wool, the profile that never turned fully to a room until it owned him back. Don Tiberius Gallo did not speak. He didn't need to. In the silence, Evelyn tracked his position by breath and floorboard, then lowered her chin a fraction too late to sell the blindness. She shouldn't have noticed his reflection. She did anyway. A man carved out of iron patience stood with his arms folded, every line of him saying stop. Under the chandeliers, his hair carried a quiet storm of silver, and the window behind him framed him in pale fire. He watched her as one might watch a door that had been locked for years and found ajar. Her cane clicked. She adjusted to miss the ottoman he had moved an inch. A test. Another test. They had been multiplying for weeks. Chairs nudged, vases shifted, a lamp tilted to lay a bright knife across the floor. He wanted to see the path she took through a changed world. He wanted to catch her not seeing. "Leave us," he said without raising his voice. Evelyn kept her head angled toward the carpet's familiar swirl and listened to the soft retreat of the guard at the threshold. She placed a glass with the neat precision of muscle memory. The piano's low strings hummed with the storm. More footsteps, quicker, heels that hurried because they always had. Lucia. She hovered in the doorway in satin, the color of champagne and worry, the kind of woman who could convince donors to build shelters in a city that ate shelters whole. "Papa," Lucia said lightly. "The guests." "They can drink without me," Tiberius replied, his attention never leaving Evelyn. "This one pours well enough." The jab landed like a tap of a gavel. Lucia crossed to the piano and laid a sheet of music there as if the room were normal, as if placing Chopin between predator and prey could soften the day. She brushed Evelyn's sleeve in passing, a whisper of contact that meant, "Stay calm, you are seen." A second voice cut the thunder. "Don." Marco Della Torre, the consigliere, who wore his worry like a tie, stepped in, rain beating on his shoulders. "The shortages at Pier 12 look staged. The numbers point to the foundation." Evelyn kept her breathing even. The foundation. Lucia's work. Their clean hand. Lucia stiffened, then smoothed it into society posture. "That's absurd," she said. "My books are open. Open books are easy to write in. Marco replied. We have a rat, and it eats where the food is good. Evelyn's fingers curled against her palm. The tapestry across the room seemed to exhale. Lightning stitched the window white, and for a heartbeat she saw all three of them as if on a stage. The judge in dark blue, the daughter at her piano, and the blind maid in teal who knew where every exit landed. Enough for tonight, Tiberius said. The city will still be ugly in the morning. He reached for his glass, and the stem tipped too casual to be fate. It rolled to the edge of the piano and hung there, the liquid trembling, a single drop fattening, gravity making its quiet argument. Evelyn's body made its own. Tendons pulled. The world narrowed to the arc of a fall she had trained herself never to break. Rule 3. Never catch what falls. The glass slid. It crashed on the parquet and burst like a held breath. Shards skittered to her shoes. She did not move. Lucia flinched. Marco swore softly. The sentinel did not blink. Rain roared approval against the glass. You'll serve in here tomorrow, he said at last, voice smooth as polished wood. During the audits. He turned away, a simple pivot that dismissed and judged at once. Lucia's hand found Evelyn's elbow, the briefest tether. Evelyn bowed her head, as any servant would. Then she lifted the cane, found the exact step that would miss the brightest shard by a hair's breadth, and let the storm swallow the rest of the music. Across the room, the tapestry breathed again. Numbers waited in the vines, patient as knives. On nights like these, the house felt like a courtroom holding its breath before the verdict. And the verdict, Evelyn knew, had been written long before this room, before the piano, before the tests, before a daughter decided to shelter a stranger with milk-white eyes. It began 8 years earlier, under a ceiling of dust and sirens, when a courthouse turned to ash, and a single nod condemned a city. It began 8 years earlier, under a ceiling of dust and sirens, when a courthouse turned to ash and a single nod condemned a city. They had called it Motion Day, 30 cases stacked like books, and the hallways smelled of wet wool and burned coffee. Evelyn sat on a wooden bench with a paper cup cooling in her hands, ankles crossed the way her mother had taught her, listening to lawyers barter futures at a whisper. She was 17, and certain that truth, if walked into a bright room, would behave itself. The bomb corrected her. A soundless flash crushed sound into the walls. Then the air bucked hot, metal sour, flinging her backward into a spilled world of file folders and broken tile. Her ears rang until ringing was all the world was. Smoke turned people into smudges. Sirens braided themselves into the day. Somewhere someone prayed in a language of coughs. She saw him through a scalloped hole in plaster. A man in a blue-black suit standing with his hands in his pockets, as if the corridor were only windy. Don Tiberius Gallo did nothing theatrical. No lifted chin. No threat. He simply looked up the hall toward the shattered courtroom where everyone who had promised to listen lay on the floor, and then he tilted his head the smallest degree, as if acknowledging an argument. A nod like the period at the end of a sentence already written. Men moved after that nod. They moved with purpose, the way river water moves once the lock gates open. The building emptied of witnesses, the way a throat empties of words. Evelyn flattened beneath a coat rack that had fallen cleanly, its coat still swaying like people deciding to sit back down. She bit her lip until the taste of iron steadied her. When a boot scraped inches from her face, she rolled her eyes to blankness, practiced instinct from too many after-school plays. The boot moved on. By twilight, the courthouse was a photograph everyone carried on their phones. By morning, the news had her name misspelled in a list that also included the word presumed. The city exhaled, then pretended it hadn't been holding its breath. On the Thursday after the blast, the day the priest wiped ash onto foreheads and reminded them they were dust, Evelyn limped into St. Brigid's with a borrowed cane and borrowed blindness. Father O'Callaghan had a donor list that read like a table of contents for polite society. He also had a habit of believing inconvenient people. He walked her through Lucia Gallo's pet project, a rehabilitation pipeline for the newly displaced. She likes a cause she can carry, he said. She carries well. Security at the estate pushed back the way a tide pushes back a paper boat. A blind maid? The head of household scoffed. The boss prefers his risks visible. The priest wrote his phone number down for the head housekeeper and pressed the paper into her palm as if it were a host. Lucia met Evelyn in a sunlit office full of plants and folders. Her dress was a kinder shade of power. Her smile contained more apology than most. "You can handle stairs?" she asked gently. "I count," Evelyn said, voice fragile in the manner of someone who has learned the cost of being overheard. Lucia's eyes softened in a way that could make you mistake pity for shelter. Then you'll start on the second floor. You'll be with me. She said it as one might say, you'll be safe if I hold on. The first night, Evelyn slept in a narrow attic room that smelled of cedar and starch. She braided her hair tight around a new secret. A microdrive flat as a coin slipped into the plait and wrapped with copper filament that hummed at the angle of her jaw. She laid the smoked scleral lenses in their case like small, malevolent moons, and promised her eyes a few hours' mercy. At dawn, she pressed them back in and felt them bite. She adjusted the cane she had purchased from a pharmacy. The shaft shaved and re-weighted so it swung too lightly, so her rhythm would always be a fraction off. The tip rubber trimmed to make a soft, distinctive tick rather than a rap. Disguise wasn't costume. It was muscle memory taught to lie until it believed itself. Infiltration is a slow devotion. You learn halls the way soldiers learn wind. You map the house by heat and sound. Steam hiss at the laundry chutes. Lemon oil where the wood breathes. A ticking air vent like a nervous heart in the north corridor. Evelyn memorized distances 10 steps to the angel niche, 3 more to the sconce that sits 1 inch lower. She learned to pause at doors not because she could see the handle but because someone who couldn't would. Lucia gave her simple work at first. The work of people no one speaks to. Polishing crystal, turning down beds, fetching flowers at daybreak when the gardeners weren't yet brave enough for the bell. Read to me? Lucia asked once, holding out a stack of correspondence with the breezy cruelty of habit. Evelyn traced the pages with fingers, as if exploring Braille, let the pads of her fingers find the indentations of a typewriter, and whispered the contents in a careful monotone that convinced anyone listening that she was repeating sounds, not words. Her hand slid, as if searching, and set the letter back after the thimble sewn to her cuff had winked, captured, filed. The thimble camera became her rosary. She touched it to the seams of life, contracts folded into decanters for signature later, shipping rosters left blistering under desk lamps, a photograph of Tiberius in his youth that had been cut to remove the man beside him. She prayed in exposures, not Hail Marys. The ledger everyone wanted was not a book. The Don had been a prosecutor once, and he never left a thing in the form other men expected. His wealth ran across shell companies like lightning across clouds, bright and gone in the same frame. Evelyn found the map where no one would think to look for numbers. The antique tapestries Lucia cherished. They're hand-loomed, Lucia said one afternoon, standing with a coffee while Evelyn stood with a darning needle. Inherited from my mother's people. They look like they remember everything. They did. Gold thread meant greater than. Indigo vine meant offshore. A cluster of pomegranates coded a date. A stitched moth hovering above a bough meant murmur cash, moved by mouth. It was beautiful once you understood that beauty could be treason. Evelyn pretended to mend phrase with her head bent close, letting the thimble's lens taste the pattern. She catalogued scent as a fail-safe. Lemon oil and cedar for the salon hangings, green soap and moth crystal for the stairwell runners, cigar leaf and salt for the coastal landscape in the dining room. If the images were ever burned, the smells would bring the math back. Information, like electricity, needed a ground. Her handler, if that word even fit, arrived the way rain arrives, anonymous, from everywhere. He was a mail drop in Lucia's foundation, a problem case number that matched the hymn page they would both turn to in St. Brigid's. A confessional slot where the latticework exchanged not sins but times and places. She never learned his name. He never learned hers. She never gave him more than small truths enough to free a courier before the gallow court chewed him. Enough to shift a raid 1 hour late so a shelter could empty. The city was a combustive room. She refused to hand anyone a match. On Thursdays, Lucia held staff clinics pay questions, school placements, a woman asking about her son who had started wearing quieter shoes. While the foundation hummed, Evelyn slipped into the music room to retune the house's other instrument. Movement. She practiced missing furniture she knew by heart, then missing it when it moved. The house had begun to change at night barely, like a chess player's first confusing moves. A chair dragged half a foot. A vase slid so the rug's diamond no longer centered it. A sconce lifted by a finger's width. She told herself it was just the cleaners. She did not believe herself. The month turned. The audit loomed like weather. On inventory night, the house grew deliberate. Doors that usually yawned stood at attention. Men she'd never seen wore the estate's livery as if borrowed. Lucia left early with a headache that wasn't a headache at all. Go to bed, she told Evelyn in the hall, which meant stay small. Evelyn went everywhere else. The gold salon waited, empty as a stage after applause. Rain rode hard across the windows. The tapestry opposite the piano drowsed in its gilded frame, its pomegranate cluster dark as bruises. She lifted the damask rope barrier and stepped inside. The sconces were lit to a dim amber. Their light felt different, more insistent. She let the cane tap and drag, the way a blind woman would, and moved toward the tapestry with her head canted as if drawn by sound. There was a sound, a tiny insect hum, new. Evelyn turned her face slightly, not enough to look directly, enough to widen the world at the edge of her lenses. In the bronze base of the far left sconce, a pinhole stared. It was not aimed at the tapestry. It was aimed across the room at the beveled mirror hung over the sideboard. The mirror did what mirrors do. It doubled. In its slice of reflection, the sconce's camera would watch the mirror watch her, catching the difference between memorized steps and eyes that adjust to light. She stood very still. The house felt suddenly like a throat swallowing. In the mirror, she saw herself as they would see her. A girl in teal with a long, pale braid, hands steady, chin tipped just a fraction to track a surface, not a sound. The copper wrapped in her hair hummed against her skull like a warning. She could have stumbled. She could have smacked the cane wrong and sold the lie and lived to lie again. But something in the angle of that camera, the petty smugness of it, steadied her instead. She reached to the piano as though checking for dust, and the thimble's lens glanced, capturing the sconce and the mirror and the corridor beyond where a shape had paused. Then she crossed to the tapestry with the stuttering grace she had baked into her bones, and she counted, and she did not miss. Behind the mirror a light blinked. Not luck, not a cleaner. Someone had drawn a net and called it ambiance. Inventory nights were designed to prove what a house owned. Tonight, the house wanted to prove what it owned of her. Evelyn turned her face back to the glass long enough to see her own eyes milk-white to anyone else catch the faintest line of glare. She lowered her head before the camera could drink too much of that truth. The cane ticked. The storm pressed its ear to the window. Somewhere in the walls a relay clicked, and a red dot went from patient to pleased. Someone was tightening the circle. She had exactly one more night to decide whether to slip through it or cut it. Lucia Gallo could make a room behave. At the Foundation's board table, under lights that flattered donors but not truth, she guided men twice her age through slides of shelters, clinics, food routes. The numbers lifted off her tongue like birds startled into clean air. She wore the kind of silk that looked like restraint. Every time a director tried to steer discussion toward naming rights or photo ops, Lucia angled her wrist, set a finger on a line item, and turned their eyes back to beds and heat and medicine. Her phone, face down beside her notebook, pulsed once. The sender was unsmiling even in the preview. Papa. She did not open it. Instead, she told the room how many families would be inside before the next rain. When the meeting dissolved into small talk and promises, she stood at the window and looked out over the city. Her father called, the docket. Wind carried the smell of storm across rooftops. She thought of how easily a court can be staged to look like mercy. Back at the mansion, she shed the silk for a wool sweater and walked the hall toward the music room. The corridor's portraits watched like jurors. In the doorway she paused habit and found Evelyn already there, laying dustcloths aside, hands gentle with the piano's lacquer, as if it were a sleeping thing. "Play it," Lucia said. "The one that tastes like morning." Evelyn's smile was a suggestion more than a thing you could hold. "Describe it to me again." Lucia sat, tucked her feet beneath the bench, and let her fingers call up Chopin. C minor, then the lift softened again. "It begins gray," she murmured. "The color the river is before anyone believes in sun. Then a stripe of gold at the edges. Hear how the left hand keeps insisting it's night? And the right hand keeps arguing that it isn't?" Evelyn tilted her head, as if angling an ear toward light. "So the argument becomes morning." "Exactly." Lucia closed her eyes. "If you could see the windows right now, the dust catching like stars." There were moments, like this one, when Lucia's heart did something foolish and hopeful. It pretended the world might keep what was tender. In those moments she forgot the cameras, the staff who were also witnesses, the father who preferred verdicts to weather. When the prelude sighed to a close, Evelyn reached into her apron and drew out a tiny glass vial. She poured 2 drops of oil into a cloth and rubbed it along the key cover, making circles. "Lemon," she said. "So the morning won't smell like dust next time." Lucia turned on the bench. "Show me that thing you do," she whispered. "The disappearing." Evelyn hesitated, then rose. In the corridor, she positioned Lucia by the bell pull and stepped to the center. "This house has a rhythm," she said. "You can hear it if you start trying to be unimportant." She set the cane's tip down, gently tick, pause, tick, then moved not in a straight line but in a quiet, broken drift, skirting the lift in the rug without looking at it, letting a breath of distance open between her and the wall camera's circle. In 3 steps she vanished into the negative space between a column and a doorframe. The corridor remained present. Evelyn did not. "How did you do that?" Lucia breathed, astonished despite 8 years of astonishment. Evelyn's smile returned, thinner. "I pretend I don't matter. People don't look at what doesn't matter." "Not to me," Lucia said too quickly. Silence framed the words. Lucia reached to adjust the cuff of Evelyn's sleeve, a pretext. Beneath the fabric, the skin over her knuckles wore a careful wash of makeup, the exact tone of Evelyn's winter pallor. The concealer had been applied with a steadiness born of practice. Lucia brushed the edge. Evelyn resisted a flinch. "Cold storage?" Lucia asked softly. "Counting steps," Evelyn replied. The crates were stacked wrong. Lucia crossed to the sideboard and took down the small silver case she kept for stage fright and charity gala headaches. Inside were adhesive strips and a balm that smelled like chamomile. "Hold still," she said, and treated the skin as if it were a promise, not a wound. She did not ask questions she could not keep safe. But the certainty in her settled a hair deeper. This girl had learned harm the way musicians learn scales. By evening, the house put on its other face. The dining room assumed its arrangement like a court-resuming session. Crystal waited like testimony. Silver caught light as if light were a witness. The Dawn's captains arrived in rotation, each with his own brand of quiet. Evelyn became service. Hands, linens, tray. From the room's skin, she recorded. Tiberius entered last, not to make them wait but to make them ready. He took his chair and crossed his arms for a heartbeat, a gavel lifted and not yet fallen. "Pier 12, he said without preamble, "is a wound that keeps bleeding. Tell me why." The first lieutenant rings. Too many recited the storm delays as if reading weather. Tiberius listened with his head slightly bent, not the way men listen when they plan their rebuttal, but the way a surgeon listens to a failing organ. He cut once. "If the storm delayed you, why did Casella's trucks arrive early?" The man blinked, swallowed, smiled too widely, the smile of a defendant whose lawyer is late. Evelyn set down a decanter near his elbow. The man's left thumb tapped his napkin twice, a tell. Across the table, Marco della Torre lined his cutlery with the exactness of a man trying to make the rest of his life obey. Another capo, Vernazza, rolled a crumb under his finger until it became grit. "Explain the inventory variance," Tiberius said mildly. Vernazza began to talk about philanthropic pallets routed to the wrong dock, Lucia's world bleeding into his. Lucia stiffened. Her face stayed beautiful. Evelyn moved between chairs with the soft-stepped sway of someone who couldn't judge distances. At Vernazza's shoulder, she angled the wine so a dribble kissed the rim and trembled there. The man glanced down and dabbed, betraying the small vanity that kept his cuffs immaculate. She filed it with his earlier contempt for the waitstaff. It meant he didn't like to be touched by mess he hadn't made. Tiberius watched them all, watched her. When she passed behind him to replace a dish, a corner of the rug lifted, that had not been lifted when she had crossed it 30 minutes earlier. She shuffled, let the cane nudge the edge back into place, and moved on. He did not ask for salt. He never asked for anything twice. After dessert, the questions stiffened into closing arguments. "If shipments continue to find charity," he said lightly, "we will all be poorer. Charity begins at home." Laughter, short and careful. Lucia stared into her water glass as if it were a window. Night changed the house by inches. After the last glass was cleared and the last man had performed loyalty with a kiss to Lucia's cheek, the staff tucked the room in. Evelyn returned with a dust cloth she did not use and walked the perimeter. A vase moved half a step off center. A sconce lifted to a new angle so that the glare line cut the floor differently. A rug skewed. The changes were the size of doubt, but felt like decisions. She made her rounds library, corridor, music room, and felt the pattern. Not random. A hand with time and a theory. She let herself not stumble. She turned at the last second to avoid a chair she knew had been moved 2 inches. She kept her face a careful empty. At 11, the storm warning scrolled across the television in the staff kitchen. Lucia found her there, barefoot, dress hem lifted in one hand like a girl escaping something silly rather than something solemn. I don't like the air tonight, she said, voice low. Stay in. I'll tell Marco you've a migraine. Evelyn nodded. Relief pressed in and did not reach bone. The house had been drawing circles around her all week. Storms just made circles visible. They almost made it out of the kitchen before the butler entered. His expression lacquered into neutrality. He carried a silver-edged card on a tray, the way men in older eras carried telegrams that changed wars. For Miss Rhodes, he said, using the surname as if he'd just learned it and was practicing its shape. From the dawn. Evelyn did not reach for it. She waited for it to be lifted where a blind woman could read. He obliged. The card held 2 words in Tiberius's small, judicial hand. Gold Salon. Tonight, the butler added, as if anyone in the room could mistake the sentence for anything else. Lucia's breath left her on a soft oath. No, she said to the butler first, then to the house, then to the weather. She turned to Evelyn and pressed both hands around her wrists, warming bone. I'll fix it. But the house had already fixed it. Somewhere a relay clicked. Somewhere a camera blinked from patient to pleased. Thunder shook the window glass like a cord struck too hard. Evelyn felt the copper in her braid hum against her skull. She lifted her cane, found its rhythm, and nodded once to the woman who had taught her sunrise. Then she walked toward the room where verdicts liked to be spoken. Stormlight rinsed the city clean overnight and left the afternoon thin and bright. In the gold salon, the tall window poured that light down like judgment, a pale column cutting the room in 2. Dust hung in it like quiet music. He was already there. Don Tiberius Gallo stood with his back to the window, so the glow made a dark halo of his suit. Arms crossed, jaw set, the blue-black wool drank the light. His presence rearranged the air. Even the curtains seemed to hold themselves still. Lucia hovered near the piano. Fingers splayed on the lacquer as if a chord might change the weather. The teal of Evelyn's dress caught the yellow of the walls and made a soft sea around her ankles. She tightened her braid until the copper inside hummed against her scalp and faced the room the way a penitent faces an altar. Her cane ticked once on the parquet, then silence. Thank you for coming, Tiberius said mildly, which, in his mouth, meant you could never have refused. Evelyn kept her chin slightly dropped and sight blurred behind the smoked lenses. She measured the space by smell lemon oil, old dust, the faint metallic breath of gun oil that clung to him like a second cologne. A new note threaded the scene, watered whiskey. The tumbler in his hand held 2 cubes, clear as decisions. Lucia's eyes tried to catch Evelyn's, then remembered what they were supposed to be and flicked away. Papa, she began softly, the auditors are waiting. They can practice patience, he replied, and set the glass on the piano with a click that sounded like a gavel laid down, not dropped. He changed nothing else, and yet the room felt moved, as when a chess player grips a piece he doesn't intend to play. He watched Evelyn as if he could hear the mathematics in her bones. She let the cane tap and drift, the old choreography. The ottoman had been shifted a thumb's breadth. She trimmed her step. The sconce on the far wall had lifted a degree. The glare line ran lower. She adjusted the angle of her shoulder so that the light skated off her lenses and not into them. The house had become a study in small betrayals. Tiberius picked up the tumbler again, rolled the cubes against the crystal, and began to speak of nothing weather, the river, how storms clean cities that don't deserve washing. His voice filled the room the way a verdict fills a family dinner. Then, very casually, he let the base slip from his fingers. The glass fell. Instinct beat training. Her right hand flashed out, not groping, not lucky, but true and exact, catching the weight a breath before it would have shattered across Chopin and gold leaf. The whiskey kissed her wrist. The cubes clicked against crystal. Her body completed a line it had been forbidden to draw for 8 years. Silence stood up in the room. Lucia sucked a breath. Somewhere beyond the doorway a shoe scuffed and then stilled. Evelyn felt her own pulse press against the smoked lenses as if it wanted to see. Remarkable, Tiberius said. The word was not praise. It was a scalpel laid on the green cloth. He stepped forward until the shadow of him reached her shoes. He did not take the glass from her hand. He lowered his chin the smallest degree, as if regarding a specimen. Tell me, ragazza, he murmured, do blind hands measure gravity that well? Or have I been hosting a miracle and a liar? Evelyn did not move. If she tried to drop the glass now, it would be theater. He hated theater. She set it back on the piano as though the act were learned by touch alone. Guards appeared the way geometry appears when a mathematician starts to speak angles at the doors, a line down the hall. No one had been summoned aloud. The dawn's posture had done the calling. Lucia left the bench with a rustle of silk and stepped between Evelyn and her father. Not wholly between, no one stood wholly between, but enough to sketch a daughter's line. "Papa, please," she said. "She is under my protection," he finished, gaze never leaving Evelyn. "We'll see whose protection has weight." He tilted his head, listening to something only he heard. A memory, a rumor, perhaps the echo of his own nod in a ruined courthouse. "What is your name?" he asked. "Evelyn." The word came out steady. You could practice terror into steadiness. "Evelyn Rhodes." The name unrolled in the room like a dropped ribbon. Lucia's eyes closed a fraction. "Marco della Torre?" At the threshold, made the smallest sound a man can make and still be heard. The Don's face did not change, but the air temperature did. "Presumed," he said, almost conversationally. "Dust and sirens, yes? They misplace many things on days like that." Evelyn swallowed and let the lenses bite. "I saw you in the corridor," she said. "Through a hole in plaster." You nodded. "A beat. At who?" he asked. "At the world," she said, and the world obeyed. Something old and cold moved across his gaze, like a cloud passing a high sun. "The veil," he said softly, tasting the nickname someone had given her somewhere. "In my house, 8 years. Evelyn found a breath she hadn't planned to spend. "I came to gather proof," she said. "Enough to end your throne without lighting the city on fire." "And you believed," he replied, "that I would not look." He took the glass from the piano and sipped as if to give the words a place to land. "You were right. For a time." Lucia touched Evelyn's forearm, a thread of contact. "She's with me," she said, fiercer now. The edge of steel beneath silk. "If you lay a hand on her." He smiled without smiling. "You think I need my hands." The guards tightened, not by stepping but by deciding to step. Evelyn calculated exits and discarded each. The window a bright lie, the hall already owned, the service stair a funnel. Her rules lay in ruins at her feet. "Who else knows?" he asked. "No one who would do you the favor of a headline," she said. "I've kept the city from burning." He nodded, once, judging the answer for weight. "The tapestries," he said. "My mother's vines. What do they say to you?" "That your money prefers boats to banks," she said. "That your fear is precise." Lucia flinched. Not at the admission of theft, but at the intimacy of it, how close you must be to someone to map his heartbeat. "Enough," Lucia said. She turned to her father, chin high. "I brought her here. If there is blame." "There is always blame," he said gently, which was worse than anger. "But not all of it is yours." He set the glass down. The guards did not move until he spoke the sentence that arranged them. He did not raise his voice. He never did. "Isolate her," he said. "No visitors, no phone. If she is touched, I will know." Lucia reached again. He did not look at her. His eyes belonged to the witness he had resurrected. Evelyn lifted her chin a fraction, not defiance. Not yet. Simply visibility after a long drought. "If you kill me," she said, "the drive moves without me. If you don't, I sit at your table and tell you where your wounds are." He regarded her, amused in the way men are amused by storms they think they understand. "You assume I need a conscience." "You need a witness," she said. "You always have." He let that settle into the gold of the room. Then he nodded, the smallest movement, the one that had once unmade a building. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will sit at my table." He turned away, which was the courtesy he gave the living. The guards closed like parentheses. Lucia's fingers laced with Evelyn's for one brief, secret second before the circle took her, the braid burning against her neck like a brand. The afternoon held its breath. The window poured quiet onto the floor. Somewhere deeper in the house, a relay clicked from patient to pleased. They took her lenses first. The butler stood with a silver dish as if receiving a relic. Evelyn lifted her chin and slid the smoked scleras free. Air kissed the raw rims. The world struck. The house, once a dim aquarium, snapped into cruel brightness, edges too sharp, mirrors too honest, gilding too loud. Light from the tall windows burned without asking. Her room changed overnight. A new camera blinked from the crown molding, another nested in the lamp finial, a third stared from the smoke detector, its red dot patient. The copper in her braid hummed until her scalp ached. At 9 she was walked, not pushed, to the gold salon and placed in a chair at Tiberius's right hand. The position was ceremonial in his court counsel seat, witness seat of someone the boss meant to hear and be seen hearing. "Look," he said softly, without heat, properly. Men arrived in suits that fit like skins. Ledgers opened. The Don's empire breathed onto paper. Shipments, variances, returns. He turned each page as if it were a face. Evelyn swallowed the brightness and listened to bodies. The first lieutenant spun his signet when he rounded up numbers. A junior capo licked his lip before using the word unfortunate. Marco Della Torre lined his pen parallel to the ledger's edge when someone lied by omission. Vernazza Cuff's immaculate smile for sale rolled a crumb under his finger until it was grit, then flicked it, as if untouching mess made it less real. "Pier 12 again," Tiberius said, flipping to a column that bled ink like a wound. "Explain." Vernazza leaned, all contrition and cologne. "Storm backlogs, Don. Human error with the charity pallets. The Foundation's trucks." "The Foundation is not yours," Lucia said from the far chaise, where she pretended to read reports and failed at pretending. Evelyn bent toward the ledger. The carbon copies from the pier smelled wrong. Dock receipts carried salt, diesel, wet rope. These carried varnish and a whisper of eucalyptus, the scent the printers downstairs used when smoothing cheap stock to pass for good. The stamps didn't bite deep. The ink hadn't bled into proper fibers. "Fakes," she said, low enough for only the man beside her to hear. "Printed away from the dock. The shortages are written, not real." Tiberius didn't glance at her. His forefinger tapped once on the column. The smallest applaud a thought can get. "If the shortages are fiction," he said aloud, turning the page to Vernazza without accusation or permission to breathe, "the fiction writer is either lazy or arrogant. Which are you?" Vernazza laughed in the manner of a man who trusts his smile. "You know me, Don. I don't read." The meetings became a rhythm that week. Men squirming on the hook of their own ticks while Evelyn named the metal. Tiberius used her like a tuning fork tap a statement. Listen for the clean note. Discard the dull. He never asked how she knew. He only required that she be right. At night the house multiplied eyes. Camera dots glowed like tiny wounds in the dark. The copper filament fuzzed their appetite at arm's length, but she felt watched the way people feel rain before it falls. Guards walked in pairs. Doors that had once sighed now shut the way safes shut. The benefit came on Thursday, because elegance likes habit. Lucia's ballroom filled with money dressed as mercy. There were speeches written by assistants and tears assembled from the best pieces of people. Evelyn wore black, the staff's uniform, and moved at the edge of the room like a rest in a feverish score. She knew gala smells, lilies and perfume, champagne and lemon oil, velvet and camera sweat. When the tray came up from the catering corridor, the topmost flutes sang cold and clean except one. It carried a bitter almond note, thin as a blade hidden in fruit. Her body remembered before her mind finished the sentence. Courthouse air had tasted like metal. This tasted like a smile that didn't reach eyes. Cyanide wasn't theatrical. People liked to pretend it was apples, but in bubbles it rode quick. Evelyn followed the tray. The waiter was new or nervous. His wrist shook a little, painting light across glass. The intended path was obvious, between Lucia and the philanthropist from the newspaper's Sunday section, toward Lucia's hand, which reached automatically when people offered toasts in her house. At the last second, Evelyn misstepped. The heel of her shoe kissed the edge of the tray. Champagne lifted, rolled, and beautifully went everywhere. A silvery rain, laughter, then the sympathetic awe of a crowd that enjoys accidents more than it should. Evelyn apologized in the careful tone of a servant who has ruined nothing. She kept her eyes down. She wiped Lucia's wrist with a napkin, clean glass, clean skin, clean air. Clumsy. Analysis. The audit ate with clean teeth. By the end of the week, Lucia's offices looked like a crime scene that had decided to be tasteful about it. File boxes labeled in the sharp hand of men who never lifted anything heavier than a pen. Employees called in one by one to explain decimals that had always behaved before. Funding was frozen, pending review. Shelter orders were temporarily halted. The phone calls were polite threats written in grant language. Lucia stood in the doorway of a storeroom she'd once called the pantry because she preferred domestic words to bureaucratic ones. Metal shelves held blankets, canned milk, boxes of prenatal vitamins. She touched labels the way people touch names on a wall. "They're counting the blankets," she said. Wonder and fury braided into the same breath. As though blankets are capable of fraud. They're counting you, Evelyn said. Lucia's laugh was a brittle, beautiful thing. Then they'll need more fingers. They stood there until the hum of the fluorescent light made a high sugar in the blood. Outside, rain still worried the city. Inside, the house had discovered new corners from which to stare. In Lucia's office, she closed the blinds and sat on the floor in her stocking feet, like a girl in a dorm room after midnight. She gestured for Evelyn to join her. The carpet smelled like lemon and wool and the ghost of coffee. I should have told you sooner, Lucia said, looking at her knees. But if I said it out loud, it would become a thing someone could take away. Said what? That you could see. Silence took stock of itself. Lucia kept her eyes down. The first month, she said. You avoided puddles when you carried laundry across the courtyard. You smiled at the green tulips before they opened. You adjusted for furniture that had been moved before your cane found it. At first I thought hope plays the cruelest games, perhaps your sight comes and goes. Then I realized it didn't have to come or go. It only had to be ours. You protected the lie, Evelyn said softly. It protected me, Lucia answered, finally looking up. I could keep you if you needed keeping. I could love you if you pretended not to need it. Something warm and sharp moved under Evelyn's ribs. She had built a life out of performance. She had not expected someone else to sign the contract. Lucia drew her knees up and rested her chin. What do we do? She asked. He's tearing the foundation down to find a rat he planted. We give him a wound he can't cauterize with fire, Evelyn said. A narrow cut, precise. Enough to remove the infected piece without taking the limb. Lucia's mouth tilted. Surgical strike. Evelyn nodded. His signet opens the vault beneath the old legal library. The off-books account summaries sit there between wills and wedding contracts, because he thinks history is a better lock than steel. We clone the signet, enter once, copy only what ties Vernazza and the dock fraud directly to murders. No wide spill. One magistrate, one journalist who still remembers how to fact-check. If the city thinks the throne is collapsing, it will stampede. People die in stampedes. Cloning a signet. Lucia's eyes brightened with the brittle relief of a plan. How? Evelyn took a small envelope from her apron and poured a bead of dark wax into Lucia's palm. It smelled like clove and old libraries. He warms it when he thinks. Left hand. She placed Lucia's hand over her own. You're going to take it from him the way you take everything. With a kiss, no one notices. Lucia tested the bead with her thumb. It softened under her heat and went pliant as gum. An air kiss? At a gala? That doesn't touch. It touches enough, Evelyn said. You cradle his hand in both of yours as you lean in. You laugh. The way you do when someone says something you refuse to admit is cruel. Your glove collects the imprint. I peel it later. We could be caught, Lucia whispered, thrilling to it and terrified. We will be caught. Evelyn smiled with one corner of her mouth. We are already caught. Let's choose the net. They rehearsed in the music room because it had mirrors that told the truth. Lucia put on her gala face and stood with the practiced slouch of a woman who belongs everywhere. Evelyn wore gloves too big and a posture too small. They danced 3 steps of conversation. Then Lucia angled, lifted her chin, fluttered laughter that would read as harmless from a camera's distance, and pressed her palms lightly around an invisible wrist as her mouth barely grazed the air by Evelyn's cheek. Again, Evelyn said. They did it again, then again, until Lucia could do the motion blind, which made Evelyn's chest ache in a way that wasn't about lies at all. In the spaces between practice, Evelyn tightened the braid around her skull, winding the copper filament flatter, closer. The microdrive lay like a secret coin, where only a lover's palm would feel it. When she twisted, the copper sang faint against her scalp, an insect hum that snarled cameras at elbow's reach. She had relied on it for years as a shield that never asked anything in return. Now it would have to be a sword too. Lucia watched her rebraid. It hurts, she asked. It hums. Evelyn secured the final pin, felt the filament settle, like a hive deciding whether to swarm. Swarm later, Lucia said. Now we steal from a dragon in his nest. The chance arrived faster than they expected. Word went out. A donor insisted on an emergency soiree to reaffirm confidence. Lucia, who could host a hurricane and make it RSVP, obliged. Men in suits arrived with their wives and their jokes. Camera crews parked where they were told and nowhere else. Tiberius circulated like a slow-moving verdict. His signet flashed when he shook hands. It warmed when he thought. Lucia moved through her rooms with a smile that was nearly a weapon. She paused by a senator, excused herself from a gossip heiress, and slid toward her father at the exact moment he took a glass from a tray. "Papa," she said, happiness enlarging her eyes to the perfect stage light. "Smile." He did, because he always did when she asked. She leaned in for the air kiss, one cheek, then the other, the gesture of all civilized people. Her hands floated up to hold his wrist as if her balance depended on him. The glove kissed the ring. The clove-scented bead drank the crest, the stylized G half hidden in a laurel, the minuscule nick near the lower leaf, the pressure he preferred without knowing he preferred it. Evelyn, 3 paces behind with a tray, looked nowhere and saw everything. She shifted to block a camera's angle and felt the copper sing. Lucia's fingers dropped. A heartbeat later, Lucia's hand brushed the lip of the tray, a correction for a stumble, nothing more, and the glove lay folded under a napkin. Evelyn moved on. Later, in a service corridor that smelled of bleach and steam, she slid the glove off like a snake shedding good fortune. The wax bead sat in the palm, perfect as a guilty moon. They did not celebrate. They didn't know how anymore. After midnight, the house thinned to its essentials. Guards at angles, cameras blinking red, rain shouldering the eaves. Lucia retreated to her office to send emails that were only weather reports. Evelyn turned toward the staff stair with the glove tucked against her ribs and stopped when a familiar silence rearranged itself at the top of the steps. Tiberius. He filled the hallway without filling it, the way a verdict fills a life. No tie, shirt open at the throat. The signet rested where it always did, his father's line drawn into metal. He did not speak. He rarely began arguments with words. Evelyn dipped her chin, the gesture of a servant who recognizes shoes. She would pass him, and in passing become furniture again. That had been the trick for 8 years. He stepped aside to let her by. As she moved, a hand lifted, almost absent-mindedly, as if smoothing air. His fingers brushed the tail of her braid. Copper vibrated under his touch, an insect hum transmitted to bone. He did not pull. He did not prod. His hand simply rested for half a second, feeling the shape of what he had always ignored, the peculiar weight, the faint metallic warmth. His gaze, usually general in corridors, focused to a point. He looked at the braid not as a father looks at a daughter's hair, not as a boss looks at a maid's neatness, but as a judge looks at a piece of evidence he has finally noticed in a photograph he's had for years. "New pins," he said, almost idly. "Yes, Don," Evelyn replied, her voice obedient and emptied, the way a sheath agrees with a knife. His hand fell away. He continued down the hall without turning, without summons, without decree. But the look had lingered a fractional pause where interest hardens into hypothesis. The braid hummed against her skull as if it too had heard what the air had decided. The circle was shrinking. And next time, his fingers would not pass so lightly. The chandeliers were lit before noon, as if daylight weren't trustworthy. Tiberius convened his captains beneath their glass rain and arranged them like a jury. Vernazza to the left where the light could catch his cuffs, Marco straight ahead where a conscience might sit, the dockmen along the wall with hands that smelled of rope. Evelyn took her chair at the Don's right, the witness seat that wasn't a seat at all but a position his listening angled through her. He opened ledgers without ceremony. "Pier 12, he said, a judge calling the single case that contained the others. Evelyn watched bodies, a pulse in the throat when the word inventory landed, a left ear reddening at the phrase variance. Vernazza's crumb-rolling finger ground nothing into grit again. "He lies smoother when he's rehearsed," she murmured, barely sound. "Rehearsed," Tiberius repeated mildly to the room, "is a cousin of planned. Show me where." The dock foreman, Casella, glanced down too long at a column that did not need looking. His shoe heel ticked against chair rung a metronome of panic. He tried a smile. It cracked. "The charity pallets," Casella said, eager to give a useful truth that wasn't the dangerous one, were mislabeled. "By who?" Tiberius asked, the knife choosing which string to cut. Casella breathed Vernazza's name before he could think not to. Vernazza laughed, soft and outraged, the laugh of men who believe their suits are armor. He began to perform insult. Evelyn leaned close. "He'll offer you theft to hide murder," she whispered. "He thinks money is the only language." Tiberius lifted a finger and the room quieted. "Let's start smaller," he said. "Casella, the shortages, were they written or real?" Casella stared at the ledger as if it might rearrange itself into absolution. When it did not, something in him folded. "Written," he said. "Sir." Vernazza's jaw went stone. "He misreads," he said. "He—" "Enough," Tiberius said, not loud, and the word settled like a lid. He turned to the foreman. "Who told you to write lies with good ink?" Casella's eyes flicked to Vernazza and then fatal error away. To the door, to a life that would not have him anymore. The first internal split walked into the room like a person you don't want to see and must. "Bring him outside," Tiberius said. The courtyard wore rain stains like old verdicts. The staff pretended they didn't know the choreography. Tiberius did not grandstand. He spoke to Casella in a voice a father might use for a boy who's taken the family car and hit a hydrant. "You could have told me sooner." My wife," Casella swallowed. "Sir, if you—" "Mercy makes orphans," Tiberius said, almost gently. He fired once. The sound was a door slammed a city away. It made a space in the afternoon that nothing could fill, so the silence fled back to the salon with them and sat down where Casella used to. Evelyn tasted copper that wasn't from her braid. In her careful arithmetic, the foreman had been salvageable, small, scared, a bridge to bigger names. She had planned to bend him toward the magistrate whose wife Lucia had harbored one winter. Now he was a cautionary tale cooling on stone. After the room resumed its breathing, Tiberius let the ledgers close. The captains leaked away down hallways like polite smoke. He stayed. So did Evelyn. The window threw a strip of bright across the piano. Rain held its breath at the glass. "You will tell me it was waste," he said, as if continuing a conversation they'd always been having, that a smaller pain would have bought a larger truth. "It would have bought time," she said. "Time buys blood you don't have to spill." "And if time betrays you?" He turned his head, studying the polish of the keys, his reflection fractured there. "My father believed in time. He believed men change when they're spared. The man who ambushed him outside the bakery was the man he'd spared a year before. There is no logic to grief. I choose the logic I can count." "You choose fear," she said. "I choose order," he corrected. "The city prefers monsters it understands. I am resident monster." "You don't have to be," she said, and surprised herself with the softness in it. He looked at her then. Really looked, the way he had looked at the braid, the way he looked at a ledger he suspected of lying. "Don't confuse capacity with choice," he said. "I buried the boy who wanted to be a good man. He made orphans." He left her with the piano and the dust. By afternoon, a new memo arrived from the head housekeeper, its tone briskly hygienic. Routine hair inspection for staff. New standards. Nits in the laundry rumored. Evelyn read it twice, and felt the copper sing, warning against her scalp. Lucia intercepted her in the hallway with a smile that lied for both of them. "Music room," she said. "Now." They locked the doors. Lucia lifted the piano lid, not because she needed the soundboard, but because it gave the room an alibi of music if anyone knocked. "How tight can you stand it?" she asked, already pulling pins. "Blood tight," Evelyn said. Lucia's fingers were quick and careful. She opened the braid, released the microdrive glimmering like a swallowed star, then tucked it flatter, closer, threading hair over copper in a pattern that would pass fingers but not scanners. "If they touch your hair, I'll fire them," she whispered. "If you fire them, he'll ask why," Evelyn replied, steady. Lucia's mouth thinned. "Then I'll promote them and send them to the coast." She wove and patted and bit a loose end off like a seamstress on a deadline. There. Evelyn felt the weight settle, a crown of necessity. They replaced pins with fewer, smarter ones. They dusted stray hairs from the keys so the scene would look like practice, not surgery. By the time the housekeeper arrived with her clipboard and apologies, the braid was a well-behaved thing. Fingers skimmed, found neatness, moved on. Night carried its own appointment. In a linen closet, Evelyn mixed the signet mold with a solvent that smelled like hospitals and thumbed the wax impression into a clean, resisting shape. When she lifted it away, she held a negative of the G that had ruled her last 8 years. She breathed until her hands forgot to tremble. The stairs down to the old legal library remembered feet that had argued about dowries and estates. The vault sat behind a shelving unit that had always been a little too far from the wall. She pressed the cloned crest to the hidden plate, turned like she had seen him turn pressure, twist, patience. The mechanism engaged with a click that felt obscene in the quiet. The copper filament hummed. The jammer covered cameras at close range. Beyond that, the house still had ears. Evelyn slipped inside, a pocket of darker dark. Ledgers slept on metal shelves. She went to the one she had mapped by scent and weight, eucalyptus and varnish and a whisper of cigar leaf. She opened to the page where a stitched moth, long ago on a tapestry, had taught her the code for murmurcash by mouth. Vernaz's name didn't appear, but the pattern did, a signature he didn't know he had. She slid pages into the microdrive's small hunger. Halfway through, the copper stuttered just a hitch, as if a bee had paused mid-flight. A line of red on the wall blinked from patient to awake. Somewhere in the house, a relay clicked. Somewhere farther, a monitor woke itself. A tiny alarm chirped, not loud. A throat clearing in a sermon. Evelyn froze, breath pooled high. She counted the chirps, 1, 2, then silence, then a new sound. The soft intake of a building that has decided to start paying closer attention. She closed the ledger and laid it back exactly so. The door behind the shelves looked suddenly like a mouth deciding how wide to open. In the corridor beyond, a shoe scuffed once, then stilled. The chirp in the vault became a siren in the city. By morning, agents in windbreakers shouldered into warehouses like weather people had hoped would pass them by. Unmarked sedans broke into convoys. Helicopters chopped the sky above the river. Radios said words the House hated: warrants, sealed indictments, federal jurisdiction. The screens in the staff kitchen showed black jackets pouring across a loading dock Evelyn recognized by the pattern in its rust. Her code line, a hymn number at St. Bridget's, a voicemail with no words answered with a different number than agreed. She knew what that meant. Her handler had moved without her. Not narrow, not surgical. A dump. The city convulsed. When large truths spill, they don't sort themselves on the way down. They break the bowls. She found Lucia where the foundation lived garage level. Raw concrete, pallets of diapers and hope. A van idled with its back doors open like a mouth. The air smelled of hot rubber and old rain. A man with a clipboard leaned the wrong way, shoulders tight, cap pulled low. He looked like a volunteer until he didn't. "Miss Gallo," he said, too polite. "Could we—" Evelyn felt the scene tilt, the quiet in the engine's exhaust, the way the second man near the pillars paused as if remembering choreography. She moved without the lenses and with the old blindness anyway, head down, angles soft, a stumble over nothing. The cane she was not carrying became her hands. A crate slid, her palm finding its edge, her body swinging off rhythm so that when the clipboard man reached to steady her, she fell past him and into his shadow. Her elbow found the notch under his ribs. The crate clapped down on his instep. He grunted. His hand came up, knife bright. She let panic be the costume and knocked a bundle of donated umbrellas from a table. The plastic cracked loud. Light stuttered. The second man looked. Lucia, who had been taught to host hurricanes, swung a car door into his knee with the clean dislike of a woman tired of weather. He folded beautifully. Evelyn took the knife from the first man, the way waiters take plates, and laid him down with his own momentum, knee to neck, apology in the precision. She didn't need to be stronger. She needed to be surprising. "Go," she said to Lucia, already pulling the van keys free of their lanyard. "We're done being harvested." They left the men blinking at fluorescent angels. By the time the security feed woke, the copper had fuzzed the frame into nothing helpful. Upstairs, in Lucia's office, sirens stitched the air tight. Evelyn spread pages and flash drives and a ledger's weightless ghost across the rug. "Not everything," Lucia said, voice small in the large room. "Only what doesn't make stampedes." Evelyn nodded. Vernaz's orders to Casella, the fake doc receipts ink that doesn't bleed, the transfers that route through those companies with dead cousins' names. And this. She slid forward a copy of a death notice that had never made a paper, corner-clipped body dumped under cranes, a courier who had known too much about pallets and not enough about prayers. Vernaz's car had been caught by a traffic camera 1 block away. Lucia's fingers tightened around the photograph until it curled. 2 recipients, Evelyn said. The journalist who still walks his own beats. The magistrate your shelter kept fed when his wife left. "And after?" Lucia asked. "We turn everything else off," Evelyn said. "We don't let anyone use the flood as an excuse to drown." They worked in the eye of noise. Lucia stitched an email that had weather in it and proof. Evelyn timed sends to cross a precinct line at the second agent's change shift. She bounced attachments through a charity server and an old choir list. The copper hummed. Cameras blinked and forgot. When the packets left the house, Evelyn felt the lack like a tooth fall tongue to emptiness, startled, relieved, scared of all the meals that lay ahead. The gold salon found them by evening, because all verdicts in this house preferred that room. The window poured a narrow, late light that burned the dust orange. The mirror held siren flickers like campfire. And he was there. Don Tiberius Gallo stood not with his arms crossed but with one shoulder favoring the other, white shirt open, dark suit jacket bitten at the seam by a line of red. Blood had soaked his cuff to a heavy coin. He held a pistol and a glass, as if a man could balance thirst and decision in the same hand. Lucia hovered near the piano, fingers on the lacquer, eyes on the blood. She didn't say papa because sometimes that word breaks a person in two. Evelyn stepped in soft. The teal of her dress caught the room's tired gold. The old image, new ruin. Vernazza? She asked. Afraid of courts, Tiberius said. Not winded, not theatrical. He tried to buy me with panic. He forgot I prefer math. He also forgot I get shot like anyone else. Feds at the gate, Lucia whispered. The sirens made a seam in her voice. They're asking politely. They won't ask long, he said, and still his eyes were where they always landed when they were clearest. On Evelyn. You moved a stone without starting a landslide. Your man moved the mountain. He isn't my man, she said. He was my method. He fell in love with fire. I admire fire, Tiberius replied, but it can't testify. He lifted the pistol steady, single-handed, pointed past Evelyn into possibility. Here is the bargain, he said, a surgeon asking a family for consent. Stand with me and we cleanse quietly. I will cut out the rot you and I both see. I will not spare those you name. Or stand against me and watch the city burn to prove a point. Lucia made a sound small as a glass chip underfoot. Papa. You mistake me, Evelyn said. Light crawled the glass in his hand and put a small sun in the whiskey. I didn't come to be your gavel. I came to end the throne without blood. I failed at that this morning. I can still choose what I am now. What are you? He asked. A witness, she said, not yours. The room held its breath. The pistol held its line. In the mirror, sirens licked the glass into flame. He looked at her for a count that would have broken softer people. It did not break him. It turned something in him to conclusion. He lowered the gun. The breath the house had been keeping left as if someone had opened a door. At the threshold, guards appeared in angles, geometry coalescing like storm. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to when he was most dangerous, or when he was most kind. The maid belongs to my daughter, he said. The sentence walked ahead of Evelyn and Lucia and took the weapons out of hands. Men who had been part of furniture a minute ago stepped back and became ornaments again. The house exhaled. The crown quietly loosened from his head. You can't buy this with a sentence, Evelyn said, because truth likes its receipts. No, he said. I purchase it with myself. Lucia's hand found his sleeve near the wound, pressed a daughter's plea into cloth. He covered her hand with his and set it aside without pressure, the gentleness of a man untying a rope so a boat can leave quickly. Go, he said to them. Send your quiet truth. Make it hold. They went. Not running reads as guilt on cameras, but quick as if someone else had asked them to fetch something from upstairs. In the mirror, the sirens painted their backs with fire. By the time they reached the side entrance, the courtyard boiled with agents and rain. Voices braided. Open, open, hands, warrant. The house decided to be meek. It opened. In the gold salon, he put the gun on the piano, the way men put family photographs down when they know the room will soon be full of strangers. He took off his jacket and folded it with one hand, a left-handed neatness. He walked toward the sound of the state. At the door he paused and looked once toward where the braid had vanished. His eyes were bright, not wet. A man who had chosen a court over a war. He stepped out with his hands empty. The sirens converged. The agents lifted their lines. The fire in the glass became the fire on his cuffs, red, blue, red. A coronation of the only crown he could wear now. Consequence. The court liked to pretend it was cleaner than the rooms that fed it. Flags, seal, wood polished to an idea of truth. A bailiff who said all rise like a spell. Reporters whose pens moved even when nothing was said, because silence counts too. Evelyn took the stand and did what she had come to do. Witness without fire. She answered with nouns and narrow verbs. She named Pier 12, not every pier. She described Vernazza's orders to write shortages with good ink, and the dock receipts that smelled like eucalyptus instead of salt. She explained how the numbers hid in patterns, how gold thread meant greater than, how pomegranates were dates, how a stitched moth once landed on a ledger. She did not give them maps to other rooms. She did not pronounce a bloodline guilty or turn a city into a lineage chart. "The curated packet?" the prosecutor asked. Voice careful, as if speaking around glass. "Holds," Evelyn said. "It shows murder, not myth." She refused to make enemies pretty. She refused to make allies saints. She stayed within the length of what she had actually seen. The reach of a room, a hand on a glass, a nod. Her lawyer frowned when she would not indulge a narrative. The magistrate did not. He had been fed when his wife left. He still remembered what mercy tastes like when it arrives warm. Vernazza cracked on day 3. The way men crack when their reflection in a TV camera looks like something they would not buy. He pled to what the packet made: math-ordered killings at the docks, falsified inventories, witness tampering with the elegance of a forged stamp. The larger, louder charges: conspiracy that could rock a skyline hung in the air and chose not to fall. The journalist's story ran with names spelled correctly and no adjectives that could start a war. The city, which had braced to stampede, put one hoof down at a time. Lucia walked into guardianship like a verdict delivered softly. The Foundation's board resigned in unison, their gracious letters already drafted, their portraits already boxed. She turned the office into a plain room and left the door open. She funded witness routes with money that would not have to be washed, church basements and laundries and motel chains that took cash and compassion. The old confession codes became timetables and routes, hymn numbers that pointed to bus schedules, a Latin phrase that meant, "meet at the back stairs," a candle left unlit on St. Brigid's third rail that meant not tonight. She sent blankets without counting them. She sent lawyers to places lawyers don't like to sit. She cut out the showy donors, the way you cut out infection, all at once, with a steady hand, no apology. Tiberius Gallo remained Tiberius Gallo, even in chains. He wore custody like another suit, not quite as well cut, still his. When they brought him into court, he walked without hurry and sat without slouch. He spoke only when speech would do work. He watched the room the way a conductor listens for a section that will come in late. Guards unconsciously matched his timing. Attorneys measured their pauses by his blink. He had lost the throne. He had not mislaid the metronome. When Evelyn met him across the prison glass, the room gave them plastic chairs and a phone that smelled like sanitizer. He picked his up with his left hand, signet gone, cuff scar still angry beneath the sleeve. The light turned his hair more steel than storm. "You should have been a judge," she said, "in a world that ended better." "Judges are only king of a day," he said, mouth almost amused. "Kings pretend their days connect." They sat with between them everything they had refused to become. "You kept it narrow," he said. "I expected the flood." "My handler fell in love with water," she answered. "I like bridges." He nodded, something like approval passing and not staying. "The city, did it burn?" "No," she said. "It smoked in places. We put it out." "Not forever," he said, as if discussing weather. "Not threat. A statement about human appetite." She turned the phone cord once around a finger. "You told me mercy makes orphans." He looked at her, unflinching. "I have not learned to forgive the man who shot my father during his second chance." "You turned that into policy." "I turned it into order." He tilted his head. "You turned grief into art." "And then broke it," she said. "On purpose." He regarded her braid through the glass, looser now, not armor but hair. "The copper?" "Quiet," she said. "It hums when I'm afraid. Today it is still." A guard tapped a watch. Time has its rituals. He stood the way he always stood, no wasted movement. "You were the only honest witness I ever made," he said. "Not a compliment. A line in a ledger." "I made myself," she said. "As do all honest things." He set the receiver down first, a small courtesy. As he turned, he gave that fraction of a nod the old punctuation. It landed nowhere, and still managed to end something. The gold salon kept its weather even when emptied. Weeks later, paperwork finally tore the estate from the man who used to be the house. Lucia gave tours to auditors who did not have the imagination to feel ghosts. Movers came and movers left. The tapestries went to conservation. The mirrors stayed. Dust taught itself to fall where laughter used to. Evelyn walked in alone while the staff pretended she was someone employed to check vents. Afternoon light poured the same pale column she had memorized 100 years ago. Dust motes drifted like slow snow. The piano looked smaller without its arguments. On the sideboard, a single crystal tumbler waited, because some objects refused to learn new lives. She lifted it and felt the old weight, the memory of cubes, the kiss of whiskey against glass. She set it on the piano, precisely where he had liked it, 2 inches from the edge, aligned with the scratch you couldn't see unless you knew it was there. Her braid hung loose down her back, weight without hum. The copper lay quiet in a drawer 2 floors up, a coil retired. In her hand there was no cane. Her stride remembered itself without performance. The house watched and could not decide what she was anymore. Neither could the city. That was fine. She stood in the light until the motes chose new air. Then she turned and walked out through a doorway she had entered 1,000 times as someone else. She fooled him for 8 years. Now there is nothing left to pretend and everything left to see. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me your city where you are watching from.